To say he had a strong spirit isn't being very specific, but he just did. He had been orphaned at 9 months. His father had, by the story that he accepted, been a slave on the next property over. And he had been riding on a lumber cart about the time of George's birth and had fallen off and slipped under the wheel and been crushed. And then George was kidnapped with his mother at about age 9 months. And he lost her. He was returned to the Carver farm and left an orphan and raised by the man and woman who had owned his mother.
Now the days of slavery were past, and the Carvers were raising George and his brother Jim as they would raise their own children. And George often thought about what happened to his mother that terrible night when he was just a baby. George never saw her again.
The little spinning wheel, which was off to one side to the left as you entered his room there, and his fondness of that thing was just very obvious, because he told us that it had been his mother's and one of the only thing that he had of his mother. And if he touched it at all with his hand, it was with the greatest love and affection, that wooden little spinning wheel.
George was frail. He had caught whooping cough when he had been kidnapped, and croup and several other things. He was not expected to live past infancy, and then he was not expected to live past this next point and this next point, and the Carvers were sure he wouldn't make 21 by the time he was just about 10, 11. But because he was frail, he didn't have to do as much of the farm work, and that was helpful to his career because he had some leisure to think about nature and the causes behind everything. And he would say, what is rain, and what's hail and sleet, and what do the rocks contain, and can I mix two plants together? And this was a very young boy.
So that sort of thinking probably led to his hybrid work with the amaryllis plant, the flower, and
Well, there he was, mixing plants.
Mm-hmm.
He just loved to walk around and study and wonder about everything that he saw, what makes all these things, you know, how did all these things come into existence? He was a profound little boy.
What he really wanted to do was to roam around the property here and absorb not only the beauty but the intelligence and the consciousness that's in nature. He really believed that everything had some of God's knowledge and intelligence in it. He later became the man who talked with the flowers. There was a book called The Man Who Talks with the Flowers.
He spent a lot of time in the woods talking to flowers, and it makes you wonder what they said to him that he went on to do so much with plants.
He loved flowers, and he always thought that growing flowers was just as important as growing vegetables because of the beauty, and he could talk to God through them. He would sit with a flower and look into it and talk to the flower, but the answer that came to him was, he believed, from the Spirit, from the Creator, not from the flower, but through the flower. He used to call God the great Creator because his emphasis was on God's creativity or creation, everything in existence being part of that. And he wanted to participate in that by being a little creator himself.
George often watched Sue Carver knitting. He knew he could do anything with his hands, so he tried.
There was one house that was unlike the others around here. A big manorial house, like a southern plantation house. And that was because it was built by a Scotsman who had settled in North Carolina and been a slave owner there. George thought that Grant's younger of two male slaves was his father. He died, and the owner was apparently very sorrowful over losing him, and he left. His son-in-law stayed with his family. They were called the Bainhams. One day he got invited into their parlor where he saw paintings, and he was completely amazed that somebody could take a piece of canvas and create a whole scene and preserve it. Made by hand, he kept repeating to himself, and then, why can't I?
George decided he would learn to paint. He made his own brush, and he made his own paints. He painted on anything he could find. And as usual, he was using his mind and his hands. There was so much he wanted to learn. But because he was black, he couldn't go to the nearby school. So he decided to teach himself to read from an old spelling book. He learned every word in that book. His desire to become educated grew stronger and stronger. Till finally one day, when he was in his early teens, he knew what he had to do. He decided to leave the Carvers and walk to a small town about 8 miles away where there was a school for black children. For the first time, he would be on his own. Many struggles, many difficulties were ahead for him. But one day, the whole world would admire this courageous, quiet genius. George Washington Carver.